What's up guys, I'm Xteria, and this is patch 14.10 Rundown. The main things they buff is traits such as Behemoth, Exalted, Ghostly, Inkshadow, Mythic, Reaper, Storeweaver, Warden, and Sniper. The units they buff is Ahri, Garen, Jax, Kuboko, Rek'Sai, Yasuo, Aatrox, Kindred, Nico, Teemo, Yorick, Garen, Soraka, Zoe, Lilia, Set, and then they buff like a couple of Augments, couple of artifacts, and a couple of support items. The main things they nerf is like Porcelain, Trickshot, Umbral, and the main units they nerf is Ashe, Annie, Kayn, Sylas, Xayah, and they nerf like 5 augments, and you can't see it though, but like they reworked Lissandra. System changes they have is Prismatic Ores will no longer drop at Krugs at stage 2. This means that you can't have a huge power spike at the beginning of the game, which is a pretty good change. And they also kind of nerfed it, so Prismatic Orbs are now like less often, meaning you see it 20% less in your games, but if you do get it, the gold value is 40 gold compared to 24, which is a huge buff on that. So if you do get it, that means you're really lucky with high amounts of gold. And encounters that they change is the Aatrox encounter, the one that gives you XP, gold, and health. The health one specifically, you get 5 less health, so you only get 10 instead of 15. And here's the traits that they change. They buff the duration of Behemoth by 3 more seconds, so it went from 5 seconds to 8 seconds. And they buff level 3 Behemoth from 80 armor magic resist to 85, which is a huge buff. So it's really good for your Shen comp or your comp. And then they buff Exalted damage amp, so it went from 5% to 7%, which is a 2% buff, which is really huge because if you play Exalted at level 8 or 9, that means you do extra damage on the board. And then they buff Ghostly, so this means that you can have Ghostly spawns in like 1 second earlier than usual, so you can have extra damage on the board. And then they buff specifically level 2 Inkshadow, where you have bonus damage and damage resistance by 5 more percent. They buff overall of Mythics AP and AD throughout all levels. And then for Porcelain, the damage reduction and the attack speed is nerfed at tier 2. And they also buff the crit for Reaper 5% from 20% to 25%, which is a pretty decent buff. And they also buff tier 2 Reaper, meaning having 4 Reapers on the board by 5 more percent as well. So it went from 45 to 50. They also buff Sniper's damage per hex by every level. And then for Storeweaver, they also buff KO's ability power damage by 250% AP, which is the blue one. They also buff the Toma Swiftness, which is the red one, the attack speed one, by 20%. And they also buff the Toma of Mending, the revive one, by 1 more second, which is the green one, the final one you can get. They nerf the bonus trick shot damage by 10%, so it's a little bit weaker. And then for the Umbral Shield, level 1 Umbral is the same, but level 2 and 3 is nerfed by a little bit. And then for Wardens, at the start of combat damage reduction bonus, they buffed it by 3%, which is a pretty good buff. And then they also buffed the damage reduction as well, but level 1 is still the same. And then for the tier 1 units that they change is Ahri. Her spell damage is buffed throughout all levels, and the secondary damage of the ability is also buffed through all levels. Garen's mana got a buff, so meaning that he can keep casting more and more often now. Jack's spell armor magic resist, granted, is buffed by a lot, so this unit is actually more useful now early game. They also buff Kuboko's mana so he can cast more often. Same with Rek'Sai, they also buff her mana so she can keep casting more and more. And because she can keep casting more and more, why not just give her more armor and magic resist? So this unit is actually a lot more tankier now, so it'll be more worth it to play Rek'Sai now. And then for Yasuo, they buff his shield value throughout all levels, but they did nerf his faded shield by 50, so it's a little bit weaker now, the faded shield for early game, but it's still useful. And then for tier 2 units that they change is Aatrox attack speed. They buffed it by 0.5%, so this means he can cast a little bit more and dish out a little bit more DPS. And then for his max mana, so they nerfed the initial mana, but he can keep casting more and more because his full mana pool is less. Therefore, it's a good buff, so he can just keep casting over and over. And then for his spell heal, they nerfed it throughout all levels, so he sustains less. This means that he does extra damage with less healing. And then for Nar's spell AD gain per stack, they nerfed it by 0.5%, so meaning he gets less stacks, means less damage. And then for Kindred, they buffed her throughout all levels. They just keep buffing and buffing Kindred. This unit is going to be very, very good later down the line. Honestly, I can see her being a pretty good reroll comp at the moment then. And then for Nico's spell healing, they also buffed her for all levels, which is very good. So meaning she's actually going to be a lot more tankier now. And then Teemo's spell damage, same thing like Kindred. They just keep buffing and buffing him. So therefore, he's going to be a really good unit for even reroll later down the line. And then for Yorick's mana, the initial mana is still the same, but they buff the mana pool, so meaning he can cast a little bit more. Now for the tier 3 units they change is Soraka's, the primary spell damage, meaning the initial damage, is buffed throughout all levels. And then for Zoe, the primary damage, meaning like the first hit of her ability, is nerfed throughout all levels, but the ricochet damage, meaning the bounce damage, is buffed throughout all levels. So this means that Zoe's gonna be more useful as a primary carry, so I could see reroll Zoe can be a potential thing, so that means she'll just clear out the whole board with her bounces. And for tier 4 units, they nerf Ashe's HP by 50, and then for Annie, they nerf a lot of things about her. So for her HP, they nerfed it by 50, and then for the healing amount, they nerfed it by 1%. For the debuff duration, they nerfed it by like 3 seconds. And then the health transformation, they only nerfed it for level 3. Even same thing with the spell damage, they also nerfed it for level 3 on Annie. And then for Kane's HP, they nerfed it by 100. And his armor magic resist is also nerfed by 5. Silas's HP is nerfed by 100 as well, and his spell healing is only nerfed for level 1 and 2, but level 3 stays the same. For Galio, Kaisa, Lee Sin, Nautilus, and Ornn, they nerfed their HP by a little bit, and then they changed Lilia's attack targeting, where her ability, the smaller ones, they go to the closest enemies instead of it being random, and they try to hit the most people possible. And then for tier 5 units, they buff Set's mana, so the starting mana, which was 100 before, is 80 now, but it's the same thing to cap out from 100 to 180, from 80 to 160. But the good thing about this is that Set can cast 2 more times now compared to before, because his mana pool is a lot less. And then for Zaya's base 80, they nerfed it by 5. And then Lysandra, the base mana is basically the same, because it takes about 60 to even get the full cast anyways, as well like Set. But they buffed the base mana pool, so meaning she can cast a little bit more often like Set. And then for Lysandra's ability, it can no longer throw enemies who survive the duration of her stun. And also, it can no longer deal area damage around the target if it survives the duration of your stun as well. So this means that you have less AoE if the target stays alive. For the augment changes, they actually added the gold remover now at 4-2. So if you need golden remover for late game for whatever reason, it's there now. And then branching out, before you had to wait 1 turn to get the emblem, but now you could just get it right away, back to where it used to be. And then for the Haunting House, which is the ghostly augment, they buffed it by 2 more stacks, so it's actually very powerful now. So the things that I said earlier that got buffed like Kindred Ghostly is going to be a really good comp now. Hero Grab Bag Gold is buffed by 2 more gold, so you can keep tempoing a lot better now with extra gold. And then for Inspiring Epitaph, they kind of nerfed the HP ratio by a little bit, but it's still a good augment overall. And then Little Buddy, same thing, they nerfed the HP by 10, but it'll still be a pretty strong augment. This does hurt it a little bit, but it'll still be pretty good. And then Longshot, which is the sniper augment, is buffed by a little bit. This doesn't really matter because the augment's still kind of bad either way, but I mean, hey, you get a free sniper's focus, so. And then low interest rate is capped from interest from 3 to 4, which is a very good buff, so this means you can have 40 gold now, instead of holding 30 gold to get the max interest. And then Midnight Siphon, which is the Yorick hero augment, they nerfed the damage by 5%, so it kind of hurts it a little bit, but I still think it'll be pretty strong. Who knows? We gotta see till the stats show. And then Mokshed, which is the Dryad augment, is nerfed by a lot, so therefore I don't know if reroll Dryad will be even good anymore since they nerfed it by a lot, and they nerfed Gnar. But Reinforcement Gold, they buffed it by 4 more gold, so you get 12 gold now instead of 8. And Stars Are Born, same thing, you get more gold. Scapegoat, the initial gold, you gain gold as well, because before it was 2 gold, but now you gain 4 gold, so you can keep tempoing even more with this augment, and you get plus 1 gold every time it dies. Call to the Chaos, the emblems, you get 1 more extra emblem now instead of 4. And then for Living Forge, per round, instead of it being 10 rounds, you get it in 8 rounds now, which is a very good buff. Therefore, you get your Ornn item even faster. And then for the Prismatic Take It, for those people who like to reroll, it's actually very, very broken now, because now you have a 50% chance to get the golden ticket roll. And then Shopping Spree, okay, so this change is actually pretty insane. So for early game, it's very good, because you get 3 gold immediately, so this means you can make 10 gold, 20 gold, 30 gold pretty quickly, but you don't get the plus 1 gold per round, so this kind of hurts late game. But the idea is you get 30 free rerolls at level 8, because you're saving all your rolls until you hit level 8, and in early game, you get a lot of gold to roll down with, because that early game gold tempos you pretty hard to hit that level 8. And then for the artifact changes, they actually buffed all of these items: Blight and Jeweled, Cursed Vamp, Fishbones, Lichbane, Luden's Tempest, Prowler's Claw, Rapid Fire Cannon, Seeker's Arm Guard, and Unending Despair. Since last patch didn't do too well, they want to buff it to give it some little bit of the extra kick. For the support item changes, they buffed Eternal Flame, Knight's Vow, and Spite Ally. Since last patch didn't do too well, they want to buff it this patch. And then for the Radiant items, they buff Radiant Redemption, Red Buff, Adaptive Helm, Quicksilver, Crown Guard, and Warmongs. Honestly, I don't know if this changes anything because I don't play Radiant items too often, but they buff these items. And then they nerf Merlacon's attack speed by 15%. So it gives you less attack speed now. So it's the same as a default Merlacon. It's still a pretty good item overall, but I mean, I don't know if this affects anything, so I can't tell you. And then for the modes, we don't really care about that. They changed something, I don't really know. And then for bug fixes, there's too much to explain. But the main one I would highlight is Little Buddies now works on Xayah and Rakan, so that's a pretty good one. And that's it for my patch 14.10 rundown. If you have any questions, just let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see the patch notes, or if you want to see my slides that I made, you can check in the description down below. Until then, I'll see you guys next time. Later.